Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Podcast. I'm Ben Kaysen here with Paige Schemenauer, one of the original marketeers, CSU Pueblo lacrosse player, world traveler, director / actress in the hit film The Flower, all kinds of things, as well as photographer and graphic designer here at Wake Up Pueblo. Paige, how you doing?
I'm so good, Ben. How are you doing today?
Good, really good.
Nice.
Thanks for coming in. This is Sincerely Creators, so we're going to keep giving advice for young creators, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about professional photography. So a few episodes ago, we had Jared in here, and he talked about kind of phone photography for novices like me. But for people who maybe have a nice camera, they're trying to step into that and take good photos, you're somebody who can really give a lot of good advice. If you go check out Paige's Instagram, you can see all her great photography. So she knows what she's talking about. So let's just kind of get it started, Paige. What are some of the kind of key things that you need to know kind of getting into professional photography? What's the difference?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that like early photographers just assume when it comes to photography, like, oh, you just point and shoot it. Like, I think phone photography, like I know J-Rod went in and talked a bunch about that, but pro photography is a little different. Like everyone is used to taking their phone and pointing it at like anything. And like it adjusts, it auto corrects everything and takes the photo, takes it just nice.
Yeah.
But a pro photographer, like a pro camera, you got to adjust everything. You got to adjust the aperture, the ISO, the aperture, like everything. So when you first point a camera, like people will look at it and they're like, well, that is it. That's not it. Everything's white or everything's black or something. And they're like, what is going on? So I feel like a lot of people get turned off when they see that. But like, as soon as you learn how to do like those manual settings or how to get your camera to do it where it doesn't take all white or all black or overexposed, underexposed photos, it becomes such a way to view the world and like just an awesome outlet for you to explore your creativity in the world that you see around you.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I love photography. I've been doing it professionally for about 4 years now.
Wow.
But I've been doing it like my parents gave me like a little tiny digital camera when I was like 10. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. You know, take a picture of my cat kind of thing. Like, it's a great thing to learn. And even if you don't want to do it professionally, like what I do every day, if you just want to do it like day to day, there's a lot of tips that like I would love to like share about like how to just get a good photo. If you want to take just good photos of like your family or great photos of your dog when you go for a hike, you know? So yeah, I think in terms of professional photography, I know a lot of people get really scared when it comes to the ISO, the aperture, the shutter, like when you manually do it. Yeah. And I remember when I was first starting off, like a big trick to help me with this, like, and I've seen a bunch of TikToks and a bunch of other things is like, oh, like here's how you learn manual. But honestly, the best way, if you have a camera that you can set it to manual and you can do it, also look to set your camera to a P. It says a little P on your program. That's what it stands for, is program. Yeah. Because there's an auto typically on like most cameras. So there's auto and there's program. Sure. Put it to program. And then from there, you can see what your camera recommends in terms of your ISO, your shutter, and your aperture. Okay. And then from there, this is what I would do all the time when I like was first starting off, like on my first like real photography class. I'd set it to program, point it at whatever I was about to shoot, see what it was recommending. So it was recommending like, hey, have your ISO at 400, have your aperture at like 4, and then have your shutter at like this like crazy number, like 300, or shutter is of a second. So it's like 1/3 of a second or something. Sure. And then I would take what it would recommend and I'd switch it over to manual and I would put in all that information. And then I would see, I'm like, oh, okay. I'd like take the photo, look at the photo. I'm like, oh, okay. So the program recommended that I do this. And here's what the photo looks like. However, me being the artist, I'm like, oh, I want it to actually look a little more underexposed, or I want it to look a little bit more overexposed. So then from there, I'd go in and adjust it a little bit more or a little less, and then I would get the artistic look that I wanted from it. So
you just take control of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's cool. How much like trial and error did it take for you to be able to understand what all those things did and how they affect your photos?
Oh, so many. So many bad photos were taken. And like, I think people don't realize this, but it's like you take 100 photos and you maybe have like 5 or 10 good ones. Like that's like the standard, is taking like a lot and getting like not a lot of great ones. Yeah. So everyone is just like, oh, like I'll take one photo. I think like phones really change the game. When you take a photo with your phone, you're just like, oh, like that's it. That's good. Let's post it, you know? Sure. But it's like, you have to realize with a camera, when you're actually going to go and shoot it and try to get it to that pro level, to that artistic level, you're going to shoot a lot. And like you should go and just shoot a lot. I don't recommend rapid shooting everything because I don't think there's really an artistic line to that. That's just shooting everything and figuring out what you get at the end of the day. But definitely like shoot with an intent, but realize that not every shot, not every photo you take is going to be that golden award-winning photo. So
have you ever had a photo that you like lined up and you were like, this is going to be the best photo I've ever taken, and then you got to it in post and you were like, something was messed up?
Oh yeah, that happens so many times.
Man,
I'll like take it, and especially because I do a lot of like nature photography and a lot of like out in like, it'll be like really sunny or something, and I'll take it and I'll like look at my like little like screen on my camera and I'm like, yes, like that's perfect, like that's the one. And then I get back home and I look at it on my computer screen and I'm like, the whole thing is out of focus. Like, how did I not notice like this lens blur coming through? Like my subject is like completely blurred. I'm like, this isn't even usable. I don't think I could even Photoshop to fix this. So yeah, it definitely happens like more than what you think. And that's why I also recommend like take a lot of photos. So if I were to sat there and like taken like 5 or more photos of that same area, then I would have gotten the shot I wanted. But I'm just like lazy. I'm like, no, I'll just take one.
This is the one.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. So take me through like, what's more satisfying about maybe having your camera, having it in manual, taking a great photo and like editing it and getting it ready to go versus having like a nice phone like I have and just taking a shot and then putting it on Instagram? Is there a difference in like the satisfaction you feel there?
Yeah. So I think like phones are great. Don't get me wrong. Like I still use my phone. I still go out and take photos with it. I don't really post a lot of those photos because those are just like for fun memories.
Yeah.
But for like photos, so I always have like the rule of 3. And I love this, like, you go through such an imagination process with a camera. So it's like, I imagine it so there's 3 stages in terms of how I view it. So the first stage is how you imagine the shot. You know, you see the area, you see the person, you know the shot you want. So you first see it in your head. The second time you see it is through the Pathfinder, or Pathfinder or Viewfinder, depending on how you want to say it.
Yeah.
And through there, you see what you currently have in front of you. Maybe you imagined it with like super awesome trees, or the trees were yellow versus green, but at the second stage is reality and where you see it.
Sure.
And then from there you can like take your photos, of course. And then the third stage is your editing and your reality. So from there you take it, and that's where you edit little things, and maybe you can turn your trees yellow. Maybe you can turn your trees purple if you wanted, you know?
Yeah.
But that's after you're like, so that's your third and final stage is the edited, the final, the done. So I always love those 3 stages because through each one, the photo keeps changing.
Interesting.
Like I've never had a photo where I first like imagined it. I'm like, yes, that's the photo I'm going to take. And it ended up final post editing, everything being the photo that was in my head. It's always roughly that, but it always goes through like this imaginative and creative process where it either gets way better or way worse. One of the two, you know, it always goes down to like its own crazy path.
That's cool, man. Yeah. So the imagination part that you mentioned, like why do you think that part's so important?
Oh, that part is like so important because like that's where you think of all your photos that you can take. Like if I have no imagination, if I'm just going about shooting, then everything is going to look how I see it.
Sure.
You know, and I see this a lot with photographers where they will just stand still, hold the camera in front of their face or in front of their chest and just hit that shutter and just take that photo. And it's like, you really got to think of like, what's a new perspective? What's a new way I can look at this? How can I make this, like, how can you keep redefining and making photos better and making them in a way where people haven't seen them before? So that's why you'll see like I always get in like I call it like my camera stance. So it's like, I'll be like just standing, and then all of a sudden I'll like get the camera, put it up to like my eye, put it up, look through the viewfinder, and I'm like getting in a weird squat. I'm like laying on the ground. I'm like hanging from different things. So I used to do a lot of photography for at the Colorado State University Pueblo's Outdoor Pursuits Club.
Oh, cool.
And so I used to do a lot of their media, and I would go rock climbing with them. I'd go ice climbing with them, and I'd have like, I remember one specific time we were ice climbing, and I had one hand like in the pick, like holding onto the ice wall, and the other hand I'm like holding onto the camera, like trying to get the shot. And then it's like all of a sudden like my ice pick like breaks that I'm like holding all my weight on practically, and I'm just like swinging around, like I like pull my camera in to like protect it, and like I have like one ice pick in my other hand, and I'm just like bumping up against the wall of like the ice, just taking the impact because I'm like, my camera cannot get hurt. But it's like trying to find those new perspectives, and like you're gonna feel awkward. Like you should feel awkward trying to get like those new photos and those new positions. But
well, did you get the shot?
I totally got the shot.
Nice.
It was such a good shot. But like you have to be in those awkward positions to get those amazing shots. You have to think of that new perspective to get amazing stuff, because everyone has already seen what everyone sees from the ground, from your perspective. Like, why would I want to look at something like that, you know? So.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, let's talk a little bit about like getting started. Maybe you haven't bought your camera yet. What are some maybe nice starting gear that people could start with if they're trying to get into doing photo?
Yeah, so I mean, so say you have a phone and you've been taking photos with your phone and you're like, oh, I'm ready to upgrade. Like I want to get the next best thing.
Yeah.
I would definitely get a camera that allows you to adjust your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter. And those three things, it's always kind of weird when like people are like, oh, like what are these things? So my professors, when they first taught me, is to imagine it like water. So your ISO, think of like a pan that you're trying to fill with water.
Okay.
When you pour your water, it's going to go through your shutter and your ISO go through your shutter and your aperture to fill your ISO. So your ISO is like the pan, the size of your pan in which you're trying to fill up.
Okay.
Your shutter is how fast you're going to let that water in, or how long you're going to turn your faucet on, kind of a thing.
Okay.
And then your f-stop or f-stop or your aperture is like the size of the hole that you're going to let the water through. So,
interesting.
And it's like that water is light for photography. So it's like, how big are you filling your pan with, how much you're letting in, and how big of a hole are you letting it come through? So those three things are what you're adjusting when you adjust your manual settings in a camera.
Yeah.
And you can have a lot of creative freedom adjusting all three. So definitely get a camera that allows you to adjust all three and learn from there. I would recommend, if it's like your first camera doing manual, to have one that goes to a program setting and then be able to switch it to a manual setting so that you can learn how to manipulate the manual settings.
Yeah, so you have something that you can do a base off of and then go that way.
Yeah,
cool.
Definitely. And definitely make sure you have a camera that has an SD card that's readable for modern things. I remember my first digital camera had like this SD card. It was my dad's old camera and it had this massive SD card.
Really?
And I'm like, I took it to my professor. I'm like, oh, like, how do I get the photos from this? He just looked at it and he's like, oh, you might want to look on Amazon.
Like that's all.
I don't know. Yeah. He was like, oh, I don't mess with stuff like that. So definitely get like at least you can get an older digital camera. I have nothing against those. Just make sure the SD card is your standard SD card, because it'll save you. Yeah, it'll save you some headache later on.
So you mentioned light, and that being like, the big part of it is the water coming in, like you said. Mm-hmm. How important is lighting in your photos that you do?
So important. Like you don't take photos without light. That's the whole point of a photo is the light.
Sure.
So it's crazy. So there's a lot of differences between like nature lighting versus like studio lighting.
Sure. And
like nature lighting is, you can manipulate it with various things. Like people have like ND filters, which is, it's kind of like a pair of sunglasses for your lens. So that helps when you're shooting in like bright light, like midday. So like I'd say from like 11 to 2 is like ideally you don't want to shoot then. Like it's kind of rough lighting. It's super bright, but an ND filter helps like calm that down. So ideally you always, like everyone talks about like the golden hour. Like the golden hour is like the prime time. And like it is, because it gives you that warm tone, and the direction in which the light is coming from gives, if you're doing portraits and you set up your person right, it can give you this very nice Rembrandt style lighting, which is just like so sought after by like artists. That's like any photographer who shoots in a Rembrandt and another photographer like sees that, they're like, oh, I see what you did there. Like, I know what's going on. So so definitely like, though, you want to hit like, we call it the golden hour, the pink hour, and then the blue hour. So the pink hour is, golden hour is of course like golden hour. And then pink hour is right after that, where the light turns a little pinkish. And then blue hour is as soon as the sun goes down, everything turns kind of blue. And that's just like,
that's cool.
It's cooler, and it's also really aesthetic, and it's very soft. The light is super soft on the face, so it looks really good. And then in terms of studio lighting, like you can get a lot of like shadow boxes and a lot of lights to bring in, but it's like And I see this a lot with like beginner photographers. They'll take lights and they'll like go to shoot a subject and they're like, oh, they're too dark. Bring in more lights, you know, and they keep bringing in like lights and lights and lights, where it's like, if you have like a main light source, and it's like a great big light source, and then you bounce it with like a whiteboard, like I would use foam core, that brings like, it gives a secondary key light almost, but it's so soft and so gentle to where it looks super good.
It's not overpowering.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So definitely in terms of lighting, you don't have to like keep pouring in more light. If you just direct the light to where you want it, that makes a world of difference.
Interesting. So for lighting, when it comes to photos, like, is there a spot where you think there's too much light in the photo? How do you figure out what that line is?
Like too much light. So you can always tell if there's too much light on a subject by like your camera. And you can also tell, like, say my settings, you can set your settings, and a hiptogram is a thing that you can set your camera to see when you're like viewing it on a screen, and that'll show you like, hey, like your whites are blown out, like you don't use this. And as soon as your whites get too blown out, like sometimes you can save it in post, you can bring it down a little, but typically if it's too blown out, like it's blown out. You got to either adjust your settings and like lower your shutter or open your aperture a little bit more. But
make those adjustments on the fly when it's
right.
too. Okay.
So typically you can do it with your camera if it's like a situation where you can't adjust the lights. But if it's like, no, like here, I know I want a longer shutter. Like I want to keep my shutter open for like a minute. So you're doing like some longer exposure kind of stuff. And you're like, oh, my light is still like blurring out too much. Either like people will sometimes have the light too close to their subject too. I've also noticed this with beginners. They're like, oh, I want to light this. So they put like the light like 2 feet away from their face. Like that's going to create such a harsh shadow and harsh line. And if that's what you're going for, if you're going for that like heavy contrast and that heavy like dramatic look, sick, go for it. But typically like when I'm doing someone's headshot, that's not what they want. That's not ideal. So you got to like pull it back, and you got to make the light a lot softer. So either adding like a filter to the front of it, or like toning it down a little, adding that bounce like we talked about earlier, that helps soften up the lighting and make it less bright, pretty much.
That's cool. So what are the keys then if I'm trying to take a photo and, you know, maybe I'm in my friend's basement and they're like, oh man, I really want to get a cool photo of me in front of my new poster, but there's like no light in the place.
Ooh.
Like how do you try and salvage a situation like that?
If you're in a basement, which like...
That's a bad example.
But no, like, okay, so if you're inside, I would always recommend like use the natural light. Natural light is the best thing ever. Like I'll shoot people with like a window. Like if we like wake up, goes to a office somewhere, and they're like, hey, like we want some headshots too, by the way. And we're like, okay, sick. We didn't bring any of our papers. We didn't bring any of our lights. Like, okay, cool. We'll like try to find like a blank wall, but I'll always try to find it by a window because I want that natural light that's already coming in.
Cool.
Because it's like if the less light I have to use from an actual light source, and I can just use it off the sun. Like the sun is the best light you're gonna get. So like use it to your advantage for sure. But if I'm in a basement and I don't have any windows, then definitely bring in some lights, but be aware as to like what temperature those lights are.
Interesting.
So I know some basements have like those like sad, warm lights. Yeah, it's got that yellow tone. So it's like, be aware, like, hey, like I'm shooting in a really warm setting. So you can either white balance your camera or set your camera settings to like that warm tone, and it'll counterbalance that. And it'll be like, okay, I understand like my white right now is showing really yellow. So you can adjust it to show that that really yellow is white. So you can like balance it out. So
cool.
Yeah.
That's sweet. Well, you mentioned earlier, we were talking about like phone photography, and you said, all right, sometimes you'll take a photo, this one's Instagram worthy, send it off. You mentioned earlier as well that like maybe I can fix something in post. So let's just talk like editing for photos. Why is it important for professional photographers? And is it like, you know, if I have all my settings right, I should be able to just take a photo and send it off, right?
Right. Yeah. That's what everyone thinks. It's like, oh, it's good to go. Send it.
Yeah.
But no, there's so much like artistic things that you can do with editing. But there's also, there's like that line that you want to walk with editing. So in terms of shooting, I don't want to shoot something and be like, oh, like if I were to take a picture of you right now, Ben, and I'm like, oh, like, all right, you look good, but you have like your water bottle, your plastic water bottle that just doesn't, it's not aesthetic, you know? I'm like, oh, if I'm going to take your photo, I'm going to ask you to move that because I don't want that in, because yes, I probably could fix it in post, but I don't want to have to.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
it's an easy fix.
Yeah, like it's possible, but you don't. Yeah, and I see a lot of photographers like, oh, we'll just fix it. We'll fix it in post. We'll like do it in post. It's like no. Like you're gonna save so much time and so much energy if you just remove that stuff and try to always shoot for the perfect photo. But if you don't, if you're like, oh, I forgot there's a nail in the wall, or oh, I forgot like your hair. Yeah, your hair is just not looking great today. Like you can totally fix it in post. So that's like a good part about post is it can save your butt when you really need it to.
Sure.
But don't lean on it because then it doesn't look the best when it doesn't work out. Or say you're a beginner and you don't really know how to fix it in post and you're like, I don't know, I'll YouTube it. You know, like you can totally do that. You can. Like, and I've seen some people who pull it off. However, I wouldn't bank on it. So yeah, like that part is great and bad depending on how you use it. But in terms of editing, like I edit every photo I have. Every photo gets edited because while the camera is great, sometimes, especially if I'm out in nature and I'm like taking a photo, I'm like, okay, this is great. And then I look at it later on my computer screen. I'm like, you know, it's super great. Like the composure is good. Like all this, like it looks great. But like it was a little bright, you know, or it's like, oh, I really wanted to highlight the blues in that waterfall. Then it's like you have the ability within Lightroom, which is the editing software that I use. Yeah. To fix those changes and to make it a little better. So it's like I can bring down those highlights. I can really make sure that the viewer is seeing what I saw, how I saw it. So you can do a lot of color correcting and you can do a lot of style editing in Lightroom as well. So it depends on like what you want to do. If you want to make that photo look as realistic as what it was, like that helps you get there. Yeah. And then if you're like, yeah, like I really like that, but like I'm going through my blue phase, you know, I want everything to be blue. Like sure. You can do that as well. Like you can put your artistic style into editing as well. So that's where I think like, you know how like, what is it? Ceramics people, like they have their clay, but then as soon as they start throwing it, as soon as they start playing with it, that's when they form like their art. So like if your photo is like your art or your clay, then editing is like forming it to like the way you want the viewer to see your clay, you know?
That's cool.
Yeah.
Poetic right there.
Thank
I like
you.
it.
Yeah, I really
We're getting deep. I love that. That's sweet. What's like the, you know, beginner editing software that you might recommend? Is it Lightroom or is it something else?
So I started on VSCO.
VSCO. Okay, cool.
So, but that's also because I went through a phase where I was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to take it all like with I think I had like an iPod at the time. I didn't even have an iPhone at the time. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to take it with my iPod. And I found VSCO and they all had a bunch of like presets and everything. And that was like, whoa, like check out like what you can do with all these photos. And it allowed me to see that what I could do in terms of editing. And then when I first went from just like, when I first got Lightroom and like got into it, I just remember looking at all the settings and I'm like, I got so overwhelmed. I'm like, this is not VSCO.
You can do a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah. I'm like, wow, like this is crazy. And then I like started learning, did some tutorials. I'm like, whoa, okay. Like you can do a lot with this. And like, I love it. Like I can adjust like everything I want to in Lightroom almost. And like where Lightroom has like developed and come since I started using it, like it's weird because Photoshop and Lightroom were like the two main photo editing tools or Adobe tools that most photographers use. Yeah. And that's what I use. And they're starting to do updates to where like they blend so well. Like Lightroom you use for like batch editing. So if I did like a full photo shoot, I'm going to bring that full photo shoot into Lightroom and then edit all the ones that I'm like, yes, like that's the good ones. Here's what I'm going to do. And then I'll find those like 5 or 6 that are like cream of the crop. You know, they're just so good. I'll take them into Photoshop and then from there I'll be like, we're going to adjust this, tweak this. Like we're going to make his hair look amazing, you know, we can get rid of acne. We can do like all that kind of stuff in Photoshop. So it's crazy, but they're blending together so well. So I'm curious to see how the development of those two apps are going to come in the future.
That's cool. Shoot. Well, I think my last question for you, Paige, we've been talking a lot about photography, but I know because I've seen it, you've also done video before. I like, you know, I was with you whenever we were recording that 72-hour film fest and you were zooming around with the camera, doing videography. Same thing you mentioned, like the ice pick story, you're getting up on top of stuff to take shots. How does all this stuff transfer into video versus photo?
I mean, in terms of video and photo, you have the same things of ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So but they act a little different in terms of video. So it's like, say I have a really low shutter and like I can get away with that with photo because I'll just stick it on a tripod or stick it on something that's not moving.
Yeah.
And it'll take it. But in terms of like video, that's like a style that's like kind of edgy because it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen like low shutter video to where it's like, it looks like the person is like really blurry and they'll move and then they like jump move. It's like,
oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's
Yeah,
very,
I think I know what you're saying.
very
Yeah.
artistic, very, it's a style. It's a definitely like, you have to know what kind of style you're going for when you shoot like that.
Yeah.
And I think also a lot of photographers go into videography. Like that's how I did.
Yeah.
I did a lot of photography. I'm like, this is cool. And I'm like, now I can just switch it over to video and like do the same thing. I'm like, oh, like this is I can capture so much more.
Yeah.
And it's like you can, but there's an ease with photography as well. So both are like, they're like sisters, but they're not twins. So like photography is still, while video is moving, of course. However, they share a lot of the similarities with your ISO, all of that. It's the same functions of a camera. However, you have to move with a video. You see the movement. With photo, not as much. But I think a lot of people move from one to the other quite like, it's easy because if it's like, I already understand how to work my camera, then it'll do photo and video. Might as well do both. And it's like, I highly recommend doing both because then not only do you understand like other videographers, but it also helps you understand photography a little bit better as well. It's like you understand like, hey, this is how it's moving. Like, how can I capture that in a still if I wanted to?
Cool.
So, yeah.
That's dope, man. Paige, thank you so much for coming on, dropping the knowledge.
Anytime. Oh, my goodness. It's literally my favorite topic to talk about. Like, you start me on photography, I'm like, oh, yes.
I love
let's go.
Gets me inspired to want to buy a camera and get going on that because I've just used my phone.
Come on. So Ben, if you guys didn't know, was one of our actors for a little film that we did, and he killed it. And we were like, we had him like hold a camera during the process, and he looked so good. He was just moving it around. We're like, yes, Ben, like go off. We're like, you know how to do it.
I looked like, so awkward on purpose. It was so funny.
It was such a good film. He has definitely been like one of the best actors I've ever worked with. So kudos to Ben.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it. Well, it was really good. So like the film is like, I have to act like an idiot because my character is an idiot. And I was like, I don't even have to act.
Yeah, no.
Boom. You're set.
That is
a guy who doesn't know what he's doing with a camera. That's me.
No, Ben knows what he's doing for sure. Maybe not fully with a camera, but he's getting there. He's come light years since when we first met.
Oh, so. Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Paige. I appreciate that. I think my favorite part of that film fest and everything was whenever we were doing those shots of me just like rolling around like with the camera, like just like taking stupid photos of like, you know, flowers and stuff. And like, you know, it'd be really easy for you as the director and the actual videographer to be like, oh, you're good. Just a stationary. But Paige was like, do it again. And she'd get behind the flower and like do these really creative shots. And I was like, man, that's cool. So I'm really glad we got to do that. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I definitely have to give kudos to you for like constantly like, I made Ben like roll through the grass like 3 or 4 times. Oh, yeah. I'm like, no, Ben, like do it again. Like,
do it again.
He has like grass and like flowers in his hair by the time we're done. But I'm like, yes, we got this.
Yes, we got it. That's what matters.
Like, woohoo. Yeah.
Cool. Well, if somebody that's listening to this wants to connect with you, Paige, see your photos, where can they do that?
Yeah, so you can totally find me on Instagram. That's where I post majority of my photos and whatnot. And you can find me at Paige, Paige 15 SCHEM. So cool. You can check me out there. I've got all my photos. I post some of my videos, and I'm actually on my way to Africa in the next month. So keep we're gonna keep a lookout for some African photos.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah. Boy, tell us real quick, like. Tell everybody what are you doing in Africa? What kind of cool job is it?
Yeah, so I will be leaving the U.S. to go be a kite surfing photographer, videographer intern. So I will be in Cape Town, South Africa, doing some photography and videography of a kite surfing school. So hopefully I'll get to learn how to kite surf, get some awesome shots of South Africa and Cape Town and like kite surfers, and hopefully not get eaten by a shark. So
well, hopefully not. That's a good point.
That's the main thing I'm trying to avoid. So we'll see.
Did you know that more people get killed by vending machines than sharks every year?
Vending machines.
Yep, people shaking vending machines and they fall on them. It happens more than shark deaths every year.
Okay.
Either A, that makes you less scared of sharks. That's what I was looking
Right,
for.
yeah,
Or B, it
okay.
makes you more scared of
I'm
vending
definitely
machines.
more scared of vending machines. That's totally it. I'm going to see one in the airport and be like, no,
"We're gonna
Ben
stay
told
away."
me that'll kill me. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Be careful around vending machines. If you're going to take one thing away from this podcast, that's it.
Stay away from vending machines. Great. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Paige, we're going to really miss you, and I can't wait to see just all the great things you're doing out there. When you told me that was what you were doing, I was like, that's so Paige.
Yeah.
Like that's something that you could do. So
no, it should be good. I'm really excited to just get into like a new environment. Like I've never lived by the ocean. So this is going to be cool to experience that and definitely share those experiences with everyone. So
That's
hopefully
awesome.
once it's all said and done, once the season's over, I'll make my way back to Colorado and come
Good
check
deal.
you guys out.
Yeah.
Give you guys a hug.
Come back
Show
and
you all
hang
my
out.
battle wounds. Hopefully I won't have a shark bite or
Hopefully
a
you won't
missing
have a
limb.
shark
You
bite.
know?
Yikes.
That'd be good. But, yeah.
That would be good.
No.
Or a missing limb. Oh
Yeah.
no.
That would
Are you
be
not a
great.
shark person? Do you not like?
I
are you
love
scared of
sharks, and I think that's my
Okay.
issue. I think I
Yeah.
would like get into the water, see one, and be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
give me my camera! Like I gotta go shoot this."
I know people who are like terrified about sharks. Like, this roaster, but it's okay. So I was with my girlfriend at the, we were waterboarding, not waterboarding. That's
That's
not what I'm looking
no.
for. We were what's that called? Where you're like standing on the board and you're like
Oh, paddleboarding.
paddleboarding.
There we
That's it.
go.
We weren't waterboarding. We were paddleboarding.
There you go.
So we were doing that, and I kept making jokes about there being sharks out there. But she's like, doesn't like sharks enough that she was like, all right, stop.
Oh,
So I was like, oh no,
I know,
because
yeah.
there's no sharks in Lake Pueblo, but
yeah, no.
and we weren't waterboarding. That's funny that I said that, but yes, that's cool that you get to go do that, and hopefully you won't get bitten by a shark.
Yeah, no. I've had a lot of people ask me. They're like, "Oh, have you seen Jaws?" I'm like, "No," and I'm not going to before I go
Oh,
and like
you're
watch
fine.
this because I've heard so many people are like, "Oh, don't watch that before you go out there." So
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have no bad shark interactions.
Nope.
Hopefully we do have
should be
some
good.
shark interactions because
'cause you wanna
sharks
see
are
some.
amazing. Like sharks are so cool. Like I mean,
Yeah.
we have Shark Week. Like we have a whole week dedicated to sharks
Oh, yeah.
every year. Like sharks are cool. Sharks
yeah.
are really cool. So I'm excited to see them. Just as long as they keep their
From
distance
afar.
and I keep my distance, I'll get as close as I can with my camera.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Sharks
It'll
are
be
really cool. I was obsessed with sharks for a long time. I give you all kinds of stats on those, but we
Yes.
won't do
Oh,
that on the
please do.
podcast today.
Okay. All right. Later. Me and Ben are gonna go have a.
We're gonna go talk
have
about sharks for a while.
Sharks. Yeah.
Paige, thank you so much for your time and coming in and sharing some of your knowledge on photo. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys and wake up in this whole opportunity to grow my photography here and share it with all you listeners. And yeah, I hope you guys learned something. And if not, totally reach out. I'm available for any questions or any help or
Sounds great.
hit me up.
Cool. Hit her up. Sweet. Also, thank you so much for listening. We've got a bunch of other podcasts here if you want to go get some more knowledge on, all of the parts of media, because we've gotten a lot of us in here. Our last episode was Jacob talking about, what can you do if you want to get into graphic design? What are the first steps? We had Brooks in here a few weeks ago. He's a professional bullfighter. He was talking about action video, and he was like, I used to have one camera in my left hand and a bull in my right. That guy is such a boss. But yeah, if you want to hear some kind of details on that, you can check that out, as well as our previous series where we were talking like through, what do you do before you go on a shoot? What does it look like to script stuff out? What does it look like to do a podcast? What does it look like to do omnipresence? So if you want to look at all that stuff, go check it out here at the Wake Up Podcast, as well as check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Spotify, Apple. Am I missing anything?
I don't know.
I think that's about it.
Yeah,
Cool.
sounds
Go
right.
check us out. Wake Up Pueblo. Go give us a follow. YouTube. There's another good one.
There we go.
Give us a follow. Check out our videos. Check out our content. And keep an eye out. Guys, thank you so much for listening. For Ben and Paige, have a great rest of your day.